To understand 1909, you have to understand what the Grand Canyon was in the early 20th century. It was not a national park. That designation would not come until 1919. In 1909, it was still frontier, a vast, largely unexplored gash in the Arizona desert, 1 mile deep, 277 miles long, and mostly unmapped in its interior. The Havasupai and the Hopi had lived on its rim and in its valleys for centuries, but white expeditions had only begun descending into the deeper side canyons in the 1880s and 1890s. The Hopi, whose villages sit on the mesas just east of the canyon, held one story with more weight than almost any other in their oral tradition. They called it the Sipapu, the emergence hole. According to Hopi cosmology, their ancestors had climbed up from an underworld beneath the Grand Canyon, escaping a destroyed previous world. The physical location of the Sipapu is real. It is a travertine dome inside the little Colorado River Gorge, and Hopi pilgrims still travel there. But the deeper claim was this: their ancestors had lived inside vast caverns beneath the canyon, and some of those caverns, they said, were still there, sealed, forbidden, and containing objects from a world that no longer existed. For 800 years, this was dismissed as mythology. And then in April of 1909, a newspaper in Phoenix printed something that made the Hopi story sound less like myth and more like memory. The Arizona Gazette on April 5, 1909, ran a front-page story with the headline, "Explorations in Grand Canyon. Mysteries of immense rich cavern being brought to light." The article claimed that an explorer named G.E. Kincaid, financed by the Smithsonian Institution and led by a professor named S.A. Jordan, had discovered an enormous underground complex hollowed out of the eastern wall of the canyon, roughly 42 miles up from the El Tavar Crystal Canyon area. The description was extraordinary and specific: a main entrance chamber, a central passageway stretching nearly a mile underground, radiating side tunnels lined with hundreds of small rooms, copper weapons hardened by a process modern metallurgists could not replicate, yellow-tinted metal artifacts, statues resembling a seated Buddha, hieroglyphs carved into the walls that resembled Egyptian and Tibetan script. And mummies, rows of them, wrapped and preserved, the tallest reportedly over 9 feet in length. If this is landing, save this video. You will want to come back to this one. Now here is where most people stop reading the article and start arguing. Because when researchers went looking for G.E. Kincaid in the 1990s and 2000s, they could not find him in any Smithsonian personnel record. Professor S.A. Jordan does not appear in any Smithsonian archive of that era either. The Smithsonian itself has issued a firm public statement. No such expedition was ever conducted, no such find was ever reported to them, and no artifacts of Egyptian origin have ever been recovered from the Grand Canyon. Case closed. Except it is not, because 3 separate things do not add up. First, the Arizona Gazette was, in 1909, a legitimate daily newspaper, not a tabloid. Front-page fabrication on that scale would have been extraordinarily unusual for a paper of that period. Second, a month earlier, on March 12, 1909, the same paper had printed a shorter article referring to Kincaid by name, describing him as a professional explorer who had traveled down the Colorado alone from Green River, Wyoming, a feat that only John Wesley Powell had documented before him. So Kincaid was, at the very least, being referenced twice in 2 separate stories in the same paper. And third, the map. Pull up the official United States Geological Survey topographic map of the Grand Canyon. Zoom to the eastern section, roughly where the 1909 article described the entrance. You will find, printed in official government cartography, a cluster of named formations that look nothing like the rest of the canyon's naming conventions. Isis Temple, Osiris Temple, Horus Temple, Ra Tower, Set Tower, Cheops Pyramid, Shiva Temple, Krishna Shrine, Vishnu Temple, Buddha Cloister, Buddha Temple, Manu Temple, Rama Shrine. These are not informal nicknames. They are the official cartographic designations, most of them assigned between 1880 and 1906 by the geologist Clarence Dutton and his successors, years before the 1909 article ever appeared. Dutton, a scholar deeply read in comparative religion, chose Egyptian and Hindu names for a specific cluster of buttes and formations concentrated in the eastern canyon, the exact region referenced by Kincaid. The mainstream explanation is simple. Dutton and Esthete thought the formations resembled temples and named them accordingly. But that explanation has one problem. The naming is confined to a single dense region. The rest of the canyon carries Spanish, English, and Native American names. And within that single region, the cluster reads almost like an intentional map, Egyptian gods on one side, Hindu deities on the other, exactly matching the twin cultural motifs the 1909 article claimed to have found underground. To this day, hikers are officially discouraged from exploring this specific eastern section. The National Park Service classifies large portions of it as restricted, citing preservation and safety. The Hopi have confirmed publicly that certain areas of the canyon are considered sacred and off-limits, and that they will not disclose which ones or why. But that is only half the story. Because in 2000, a former Kaibab National Forest employee named Jack Andrews began collecting statements from park rangers, river guides, and Havasupai elders who described seeing sealed cave entrances at elevations that matched the 1909 description. Entrances, they said, had been covered over with rockfall or wire mesh under federal supervision. None of these statements have been officially verified. All of them have been officially denied. So what really happened? There are three possibilities, and each one is uncomfortable. The first is that the entire 1909 article was a hoax, a piece of yellow journalism designed to sell papers during a boom era of sensational archaeology, right as Howard Carter's generation was electrifying the world with Egyptian finds. This is the mainstream position, but it does not explain the map, the Hopi tradition, the earlier Kincaid mention, or the persistent restricted access policy in the exact region described. The second is that something was found, perhaps not what the article described, but something significant, and it was quietly suppressed. Early 20th century American archaeology has documented cases of finds being suppressed for political, religious, or racial reasons. The dominant academic paradigm of 1909 could not accommodate a pre-Columbian Egyptian presence in North America. Careers would have ended, textbooks would have collapsed. It would have been easier in that era to simply deny. The third possibility is the one the Hopi themselves have never wavered from, that beneath the Grand Canyon lies the remnant of a world that came before ours, not Egyptian, not Tibetan, but something older that both of those civilizations remembered fragments of in different languages. The Hopi call the previous world the Third World. It ended in a great flood. The survivors climbed up through the Sipapu. The artifacts of that world, they say, are still down there. You do not have to believe any of these possibilities to notice what all three share in common. Something in the eastern Grand Canyon has been off-limits, unnamed with local words, and shrouded in denial for more than 100 years. The names Isis and Osiris were carved into the official map before Kincaid was ever mentioned. The Hopi were telling their story before any newspaper existed. And the Smithsonian's denial, no matter how firm, cannot erase the cartography of the United States government. Drop this in the comments. If you could descend into one sealed chamber on Earth and see what was inside, would you actually want to know, or would some part of you rather leave it buried? CTA 1213 Min. If forgotten history like this matters to you, the stories the textbooks left out, the discoveries that were quietly denied, the pieces that don't fit the official timeline, subscribe and hit the bell icon. New hidden history every day. I dig into the stories that were buried on purpose, and I do it in a way that respects both the evidence and the mystery. Hit that bell so you never miss the next one. Outro 1315 Min. History is not a settled book. It is a document that keeps getting rewritten every time someone digs a little deeper, reads a little more carefully, or refuses to accept the official version because it does not match the map, the oral tradition, or the front page of a real newspaper printed in 1909. The lesson the Hopi have carried for 8 centuries is a simple one. The world you live in is not the first world, and the record of what came before is not always written in books. Sometimes it is carved in stone, hidden in caverns, printed on maps that nobody thinks to read carefully, and preserved in the memory of a people who were never asked what they knew. The Grand Canyon has not given up its last secret, and whether that secret is a hoax, a suppression, or a memory older than history itself, the fact that we still cannot say for certain in 2026 tells you everything about how much of the past remains unmapped. If this hit, my video on the underground city discovered beneath the Cappadocia region of Turkey will make even more sense now, because the same pattern of denied evidence, sealed chambers, and indigenous memory shows up there too. The story does not end at the Grand Canyon. It just began there. In 1909, the Arizona Gazette published a front-page story about an underground cavern beneath the Grand Canyon filled with Egyptian mummies, hieroglyphs, and copper artifacts. The Smithsonian denies the expedition ever happened, but the United States Geological Survey named the exact region Isis Temple, Osiris Temple, and Ra Tower decades before that article was ever printed. And the Hopi people had been describing sealed caverns beneath the canyon for 800 years before either the newspaper or the map ever existed. This documentary investigates the 1909 Kincaid expedition, the mysterious Professor S.A. Jordan, the Hopi tradition of the Sipapu and the Third World, and the strange cluster of Egyptian and Hindu place names carved into official U.S. government cartography of the eastern Grand Canyon. What was found? What was denied? And why is that specific region still restricted today? Timestamps 0000, the 1909 front page that nobody explains 00, 45 the Hopi Sipapu, 800 years of testimony 03, 00 G.E. Kincaid and the missing expedition 06, 00 the map that contradicts the denial 09, 003 possibilities. And why all three are uncomfortable 12, 00 what the Grand Canyon still refuses to say subscribe and hit the bell icon for new hidden history every day.